I have always been the kind of woman who pays attention to the smallest details, the tiny shifts in the atmosphere that most people miss. It was a Tuesday evening when the first real crack appeared in the perfect porcelain mask of my marriage, though looking back, the foundation had been crumbling for months. I was sitting on our velvet sofa, the one we picked out together in a boutique in Soho during that rainy weekend 3 years ago. Mark was across from me, hunched over his laptop as he usually was, his face bathed in the sterile blue light of the screen. I watched the way his jaw tightened every few seconds, a rhythmic clench that told me he was lying to someone, though at that moment, I still hoped it was just a client. We had been married for 7 years, a number that people always warn you about, but I never thought the cliché would apply to us. We were the couple that friends envied. We had the renovated brownstone, the matching careers in high-end consulting, and a rhythm of life that seemed unbreakable. But as I sat there watching him, I realized I did not recognize the man in front of me anymore. He had become a stranger who shared my bed, a ghost who ate my cooking and occasionally patted my hand while looking at his phone. The silence between us was no longer comfortable. It was heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I remember the exact moment the suspicion turned into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. He had gone to take a shower, leaving his phone face down on the coffee table. It was a mistake he never made. Usually, that device was glued to his palm or tucked safely in his pocket. But that night, he was distracted. I told myself I wouldn't do it. I told myself that I was better than a woman who snoops through her husband's private life. But the knot in my stomach was pulling tighter, and before I could talk myself out of it, I was reaching for the phone. My heart was hammering against my ribs so loudly I thought he would hear it over the sound of the running water upstairs. The passcode was still my birthday. That felt like a slap in the face. He was using my own life to gatekeep his secrets. I opened the messaging app, my thumbs trembling so much I almost dropped the sleek glass device. I didn't have to scroll far. There was a contact name I didn't recognize, saved simply as the architect. But the messages were not about blueprints or site visits. They were visceral, passionate, and devastating. I read words he hadn't said to me in half a decade. I saw photos that made my blood turn to ice. They were in our bed. In the photos, the lighting was unmistakable. The sun was hitting the headboard at that specific 4 o'clock angle that only happens in our master bedroom. He had brought her into our sanctuary while I was at my mother's house, helping her recover from surgery. I heard the water click off upstairs. I quickly locked the phone and placed it exactly where it had been, my mind reeling. I didn't cry. That was the strangest part. I expected to feel a wave of grief, but instead I felt a freezing clarity. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and for the first time I saw the room for what it was, a stage set for a play that had just been canceled. When Mark came downstairs, smelling of sandalwood and steam, he smiled at me. It was that practiced, handsome smile that had won me over 10 years ago in college. He asked if I wanted to watch a movie, his voice casual and light. I looked at him and nodded, marveling at how easily he could inhabit a lie. Over the next few weeks, I became a ghost in my own home. I watched him constantly. I noted the way he would tilt his phone away from me, the way he would suddenly have late-night conference calls that required him to go into his home office and lock the door. I began to build a map of his betrayal. I found receipts for jewelry I never wore. I found a second set of keys in the pocket of his trench coat that didn't belong to any lock in our house. Every discovery was a fresh puncture wound, but I didn't let the blood show. I stayed quiet, I stayed sweet, and I waited. The plan didn't come to me all at once. It formed slowly, like a photograph developing in a darkroom. I realized that simply leaving wasn't enough. If I left, he would get the house, he would get half of everything I had worked for, and he would simply move her in permanently. He would win, and I have never been good at losing. I started small. I began making him his favorite nightly tea, a special blend of chamomile and valerian root. I told him it was to help with the stress he was under at work. He drank it greedily, grateful for my supposed care. What he didn't know was that I was supplementing the tea with something a bit stronger, a prescription sedative I had obtained under the guise of my own insomnia. Night after night, I watched him drift into a deep, unnatural sleep. I would sit on my side of the bed, the light from the hallway casting long shadows across the room, and just watch him breathe. I wondered what he was dreaming about. Was she in his dreams too? Did he feel any guilt when he looked at me in the morning? I realized the answer was no. Mark didn't feel guilt. He felt entitled. He felt he deserved his perfect wife and his exciting mistress. He felt he had successfully navigated the complexities of a double life, and he was proud of it. The night of the storm was when I decided it would happen. The weather forecast had been predicting a massive rainfall, the kind that turns the streets into rivers and keeps everyone huddled inside. It was the perfect backdrop. Mark came home late, looking harried. He said the project in the city was falling apart and he needed to get some rest. I greeted him with a kiss and a warm mug of his special tea. He drank it while standing in the kitchen, complaining about his boss and the traffic. I listened intently, nodding in all the right places, while inside I was screaming. We went upstairs to the bedroom. This room, which had once been a place of intimacy and rest, now felt like a battleground. He climbed into bed, his movements already becoming sluggish as the sedative began to take hold. I sat at my vanity, brushing my hair, watching him through the mirror. His eyes were heavy, his speech slurring slightly as he told me he loved me. I didn't say it back. I just waited. 10 minutes later, he was out, truly out. I could have screamed in his ear, and he wouldn't have stirred. I stood up and walked over to his side of the bed. I looked at his peaceful face, the face I had kissed every morning for years. I felt a flicker of something like pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of those photos on his phone. I reached under the bed and pulled out the heavy plastic sheeting I had hidden there days ago. It was thick, industrial-grade stuff. I began to move, my actions methodical and calm. I wasn't in a rush. I had all night. I didn't move him. I moved the environment around him. I lined the mattress with the plastic, tucking it deep into the frame. I brought in the buckets I had prepared, filled with water from the guest bathroom tub. It was slow work, carrying the heavy containers back and forth, but the physical labor felt good. It felt like I was finally doing something instead of just existing in the space he allowed me to have. I poured the water onto the bed, watching as it pooled around his sleeping form. The plastic sheeting held it perfectly, creating a shallow, rising lake right there in our master suite. As the water level rose, his body began to react instinctively. He didn't wake up, but his breathing changed. It became shallower, more ragged. I sat in the armchair by the window and watched. This was the man who had promised to protect me. This was the man who had looked me in the eye at the altar and sworn his life to mine. And here he was, literally drifting away in a sea of his own making. I thought about the metaphors people use for failing marriages. Drowning is a common one. People say they feel like they are underwater, like they can't breathe, like they are being pulled under by the weight of the lies. I decided to make the metaphor literal. The water was cold. I had made sure of that. I wanted the shock of it to be a slow creep rather than a sudden plunge. I watched as the water reached his ears, then his chin. His head was tilted back slightly against the pillows, which were now soaked and heavy. He looked like a fallen king in a watery tomb. I found myself thinking about our first date. He had taken me to a small Italian place that had since closed down. He had been so nervous he spilled wine on his tie, and I had laughed and told him it made him look more human. I wondered where that man went, or maybe he never existed at all. Maybe he was always this person, and I was just too blinded by my own need for a happy ending to see it. I stood up and walked to the edge of the bed. The water was now lapping at the corners of his mouth. A small part of me, the part that still remembered the girl I used to be, wanted to reach out and pull his head up. It wanted to wake him up and demand an explanation, to give him one last chance to beg for forgiveness. But I knew what would happen. He would lie. He would use that charming smile and those manipulative words to turn it all back on me. He would make me feel like the crazy one for finding out. He had already started doing that, gaslighting me about small things to keep me off balance. I reached down and touched his forehead. He was so cold. I realized then that I wasn't just watching him drown. I was watching the last 7 years of my life vanish. Every holiday, every shared joke, every plan for a future that would now never happen. It was all being swallowed by the rising tide in this room. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of grief, not for him, but for the version of myself that believed in him. That girl was gone. She had drowned a long time ago, right around the time he started bringing another woman into our home. The storm outside was raging now. Thunder shook the house and lightning flashed through the gaps in the curtains, illuminating the room in strobe-like bursts. In one flash, I saw his eyes flutter. He was starting to come around, the cold water fighting against the heavy sedative in his system. I didn't move. I stayed right there, looking down at him. His eyes opened, but they were unfocused, glassy. He looked at me, and for a second I saw a flicker of recognition. He tried to move his arms, but they were heavy and restricted by the waterlogged blankets. He made a gurgling sound, a desperate, wet noise that made my skin crawl. He was trying to speak, trying to ask what was happening. I leaned down close to his ear, my voice a whisper that was barely audible over the rain. I told him I saw the photos, Mark. I told him I knew about the apartment in the city, the one he thought I didn't know about. I told him I knew about the jewelry and the lies and the way he laughed at me behind my back with her. I spoke calmly, almost tenderly, as the water finally began to cover his nose. The panic in his eyes was the most honest thing I had ever seen from him. There was no charm there, no manipulation, just raw, primal terror. He struggled then, his body thrashing against the weight of the water and the plastic, but he was too weak. The sedative was still holding his muscles captive. He was trapped in a nightmare that was very, very real. I watched him for what felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes. I watched until the bubbles stopped. I watched until the light left his eyes, and his body became just another object in the room, no different from the dresser or the chair. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I went to the bathroom and got a stack of towels. I began the long process of cleaning up. I drained the water using a small pump I had bought for the aquarium I never ended up getting. I channeled it into the bathtub, watching it swirl down the drain. I removed the plastic sheeting, folding it carefully so as not to spill a drop. I stripped the bed, putting on fresh, dry linens that I had warmed in the dryer. I dressed him in clean pajamas, moving his limbs with a strength I didn't know I possessed. By the time the sun began to peek through the clouds, the room looked perfect. It looked like he had simply passed away in his sleep, a tragic, sudden heart failure in a man far too young. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited for a few more hours. I needed to look like a grieving wife who had just woken up to a nightmare. I practiced my reaction in the mirror. I needed the right amount of shock, the right amount of devastation. When I finally called the emergency services, my voice was a masterpiece of controlled hysteria. I told them he wasn't breathing. I told them I didn't know what happened. I followed their instructions, performing chest compressions on a man I knew was already gone, my hands pushing down on the chest that had once been my favorite place to rest my head. The paramedics arrived quickly, their heavy boots thumping on the stairs. They were professional, efficient, and ultimately useless. They pronounced him dead at the scene. They were kind to me. They offered me water and tissues and words of comfort that felt like ash in my mouth. They commented on how peaceful he looked. They talked about how sometimes the heart just gives out, even in healthy men. I nodded and cried and let them lead me out of the room. The funeral was a grand affair. Everyone came. His colleagues, his friends, and even her. I saw her standing at the back of the cemetery, wearing large sunglasses and a black veil that was far too dramatic for someone who was supposed to be a stranger. I walked up to her during the reception. I took her hand and looked her directly in the eyes. I told her how much Mark had talked about his work with the architect. I watched the color drain from her face as she realized that I knew. But she couldn't say anything. What could she say? She was the mistress of a dead man, and I was the grieving widow. I sold the house a month later. I couldn't stand the way the light hit the headboard at 4 o'clock. I moved to a small town by the coast, a place where no one knew my name or my history. I spend my days walking on the beach, watching the waves come in and out. People think I'm a tragic figure, a woman who lost her husband too soon. They bring me pies and invite me to book clubs. They tell me that time heals all wounds. I just smile and thank them. Sometimes, at night, when the wind is howling and the rain is lashing against my windows, I wake up and think I hear that gurgling sound. I think I feel the dampness of the sheets. But then I turn on the light and see that I am alone. I am safe. I am free. I realize that the hardest part wasn't the act itself. The hardest part was living with the knowledge of who I had become. But then I remember the way he looked at me in those photos, the way he laughed at the life we had built, and I realized that I didn't kill him. I just stopped holding his head above water. I often wonder if he knew in those final seconds. I wonder if he realized that the person he thought was a weak, submissive wife was actually the one who held all the power. It's a strange thing, power. It doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it looks like a cup of tea. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like a woman sitting in a chair, watching the man she once loved disappear into the dark. I have a new life now. I started a small garden, and I spend a lot of time tending to it. There is something satisfying about pulling weeds, about removing the things that don't belong so that the rest can thrive. My neighbors think I have a green thumb. They don't know that I have spent a lifetime learning how to cultivate a beautiful surface while the rot spreads underneath. They don't know that every flower in my garden is a testament to what can grow when you finally clear away the dead weight. I never kept the photos. I burned his phone in a small fire on the beach one night, watching as the plastic and glass melted into a blackened lump. I watched the secrets turn into smoke and drift out over the ocean. It felt like a final baptism. I was washing away the last traces of him, the last traces of the woman who stayed. I am someone else now. I am the survivor. I am the one who stayed dry while he drowned. There are moments, usually in the quiet of the afternoon, when I find myself looking at my hands and marveling at how steady they are. I expected them to shake for the rest of my life. I expected to feel the weight of what I did every time I picked up a glass of water. But the human mind is a resilient thing. It justifies what it must to survive. I tell myself that I gave him what he wanted. He wanted a life of excitement and danger, a life where he didn't have to follow the rules. I just gave him a final act that he never saw coming. The mistress tried to contact me once. She sent a letter filled with apologies and explanations that I didn't need. She wanted to meet to talk about him, to share her grief with the only other person who really knew him. I didn't reply. I tore the letter into tiny pieces and let the wind take them. She was a footnote in a story that had already ended. She was part of the old world, the world of lies and betrayals and shadows. I have no room for her in my new life. I think about the bed sometimes. It was a beautiful piece of furniture, hand-carved oak with a velvet headboard. I wonder who owns it now. I wonder if they sleep soundly in it or if they feel a strange chill when the room gets too quiet. I wonder if they ever notice a faint scent of sandalwood and chamomile lingering in the fabric. Probably not. People only see what they want to see. They see a bed, a room, a house. They don't see the stories that happened within those walls. I am not a monster. I am a woman who was pushed to the edge and decided not to fall. I am a woman who realized that the only way to save herself was to let someone else go. It is a harsh truth, but truth is rarely kind. It is cold and sharp and unforgiving, much like the water that night. I have learned to live with the cold. I have learned to embrace the sharpness. And most of all, I have learned how to breathe when everyone else thinks you should be gasping for air. The town I live in now is quiet. The people are simple and kind, and they mind their own business. They see me as the widow who keeps to herself, the woman who walks the shoreline at dusk. They don't know that I am watching the horizon, waiting for the next storm. Not because I am afraid, but because I know how to handle the rain. I know that no matter how high the water rises, I will always find a way to stay above it. I have had my practice. Sometimes I see couples walking on the beach, holding hands and laughing. I watch them and feel a strange sense of detachment. I want to warn them. I want to tell them that the person standing next to them is a collection of secrets they will never fully unlock. I want to tell them that love is just a temporary truce in a war they don't even know they are fighting. But I stay silent. I just watch them pass, their footprints in the sand quickly being erased by the incoming tide. Life goes on. That is the most terrifying and beautiful thing about it. The world doesn't stop because a man dies in his bed. The sun still rises, the seasons still change, and the tea still tastes just as sweet. I have found a peace that I never thought possible. It is a quiet, heavy peace, built on a foundation of secrets and salt water, but it is mine. And in the end, that is all that matters. I am the one who is left to tell the story, even if I only ever tell it to myself. I sit on my porch now, a glass of wine in my hand, watching the stars come out. The air is crisp and smells of salt. I think about the life I used to have, the woman who used to worry about the color of the curtains and the menu for a dinner party. She seems like a character in a book I read a long time ago. I don't miss her. She was fragile. She was waiting for someone to save her. I have realized that no one is coming to save you. You have to save yourself, even if you have to get your hands dirty to do it. The night is dark, but I am not afraid of the dark anymore. I have seen the worst it has to offer, and I have come out on the other side. I know what lies beneath the surface. I know the weight of the water. And I know that as long as I keep my head up, I will never drown. Mark taught me that in his own way. He taught me the value of a clean break and the necessity of a well-timed end. It was the only useful thing he ever gave me. I finish my wine and stand up, stretching my limbs. The house behind me is small and simple, but it is clean. There are no ghosts here. I made sure of that. I walk inside and lock the door, a habit I will never break. I move through the rooms, turning off the lights one by one. When I reach my bedroom, I stop for a moment. The bed is small, just big enough for one. The sheets are crisp and white, and there is no plastic underneath. I lie down and close my eyes, listening to the sound of the ocean in the distance. It is a steady, rhythmic sound, like a heartbeat, and for the first time in my life, I sleep without dreaming. The silence of the house is my companion. It doesn't ask questions. It doesn't tell lies. It just exists, a blank canvas for the rest of my days. I have learned to love the silence. It is the sound of a slate being wiped clean. It is the sound of a new beginning, one that was bought at a high price, but one that was worth every penny. I am the architect of my own life now. I build the walls, I set the boundaries, and I decide who is allowed inside. And for now, the guest list is empty. I remember the way the water looked in the moonlight that night. It was shimmering, almost beautiful. It didn't look like a weapon. It looked like a mirror. And when I looked into it, I didn't see a victim. I saw a woman who was finally taking control. I saw a woman who was willing to do whatever it took to stop being the one who was drowning. I have carried that image with me ever since. It is my reminder that even in the deepest water, you can always find your way back to the shore. You just have to be willing to let go of the things that are pulling you down. So I continue my walks, and I tend my garden, and I live my quiet, unremarkable life. To the world, I am nothing special. Just another face in the crowd, another story lost in the noise of the city. But I know the truth. I know what happened in that bed. And every time I look at the ocean, I am reminded that some secrets are best left at the bottom, where the light can't reach them and the tide can never pull them back to the surface. I am the keeper of the deep, and I have never felt more alive. As the years pass, the memories of Mark's face have started to blur at the edges, like a photograph left out in the sun. I can no longer perfectly recall the exact shade of his eyes or the specific cadence of his laugh. What remains is the feeling of the water, the cold, heavy weight of it, and the absolute stillness that followed. It is a strange comfort. It reminds me that everything is temporary. Every pain, every betrayal, and every life. We are all just drifting for a while before we eventually sink. I have found that I don't need much to be happy. A good book, a warm fire, and the knowledge that I am the only one who knows where the bodies are buried. It is a lonely kind of happiness, perhaps, but it is honest. There are no more masks to wear, no more lies to maintain. I can just be. And in a world built on artifice and deception, that is the greatest luxury of all. I have paid my dues, and I have earned my peace. The sun is beginning to set over the water again, casting long, golden shadows across the sand. I sit on my porch and watch the light fade, feeling the cool evening breeze on my face. I am at home. I am at peace. And for the first time in 7 years, I am not afraid of what tomorrow will bring. Because whatever it is, I know I can handle it. I have survived the storm, and I have learned how to swim. And that is more than enough for me.